Was this a test of our faith? And what that means is
Feel what we're feeling because God has made a way.
But believers must be reminded that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Pastor talked about those who are behind the scenes. Every now and then I mention those who, over the years, behind the scenes, looked out for my family in particular. And I continue to appreciate you because you still look out for us. And you know, there are some things that most people just don't know that we go through. And there are people who encourage us as we go through those things. So we thank God for you. Every now and then I used to talk about how people used to watch our kids when they were younger. There were many times we didn't know where they were on any given Sunday. And there are people who are looking out for them, making sure they're not running across the street and so on. So we thank God for you and pray that you will continue to encourage people as we go along this journey. It's not an easy one, and it's not one that we have to journey on our own. We need to look out for each other. So we're going to spend a little time this morning. And before we do that, we're going to pray for God's wisdom so that we can understand what He has to say to us this morning. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we want to thank you for another opportunity to be in your house. Sometimes we take it for granted, Father God, and we want you to know at this time that we don't. We thank you for another opportunity to be here, and I pray that what you have to say to us, we will hear and answer and respond by changing what we need to change so that we can draw closer to you. In your name we pray. Amen. So the last time we looked at the topic, fight the power. Today we're going to continue to fight the power. We're going to look at fighting the power. And in particular, we're going to look at what I call protection. So the topic is fight the power, protection. So we're looking at one of the most popular passages in the Bible, Ephesians chapter 6, starting from around 12 to 20. And it was, read very powerfully this morning. Sounds like Miss Florlet needs to be up here more often. So, to kind of recap what we looked at last time. It wasn't last week, it was maybe last month or so. We were looking at the analogy that Paul created in his letter to the Ephesians. And it's an analogy of a soldier getting ready for battle. And there's a lot in this section to unpack, but we're just going to scratch the surface and just start the conversation in your homes, in your Christian life classes. We want you to start the thinking in terms of how we can gear up to fight the power. And so we looked at the fact that last time Paul implies that as Christians we are to expect opposition. And that we ought to be vigilant about the fact that opposition is going to come. So much so that he says we need to prepare. Don't just go on willy-nilly like that, and then when opposition comes, we are ignorant to the situation, we are all surprised. He says, stand fast. He says, get ready, get yourself prepared. And so he's saying, essentially, as I said, gear up. Every day you wake up, thank God for another day, and then essentially put on the whole armor of God is what Paul really says. We looked at verse 14a, as a matter of fact, last time. We talked about the belt of truth buckled around your waist. We said that the belt was like the first ingredient in the whole armor of God. We said it was like a foundational piece of gear because there are a lot of things that are hanging off this belt. You know, your sidearm, police have, the handcuffs, mace, all kinds of stuff hanging off this belt. And even in some situations, your pants are hanging off your belt. And as you know, one of the worst things you can have in a battle is if your pants fall down. It's just not going to be a good thing in any situation. And so that belt is an important foundational ingredient. And we talked about it in length. We said the belt of truth is important in the fact that we need to have information to fight the powers. And not just information, but we need truth. Information that's based on fact and reality. We need to know who we're fighting, and we need to know, the nature of the enemy. What is the enemy like? We talked about the fact that even a football team, when they're going to play a game, they spend time finding out who their opponent is. They spend time studying the traits of the opponent, the characteristics of the opponent, the tendencies of the opponent, so that once they go on that gridiron, that football field, they are prepared to face that enemy. And so information is important, but not just information, because you can't just take anything that you hear. You have to get the facts, the true facts, because the true facts are going to be what's going to help you to fight the battles that you have to fight. We talked about the enemy without, external forces outside of us that we meet day in and day out. Agents of evil is a phrase that I used the last time. Both willing and unwilling. There are some people out there who are just out to do harm. They know it, they intend to do it, and if they encounter you, they're going to, at some point, try their best to do you harm. And there are some that just are not aware. They are just victims like everybody else, victims of the devil, and they at times become agents of the devil, involuntarily. But they are still the external forces, the enemy is without. And we also talked about the enemy within. And we said, as much as you have the enemy outside, and you can close your doors, lock up your grill, turn on your alarm, there is an enemy that's already inside, the enemy within. The sinful nature that is within us, the nature that we all have, and we have to constantly beat down, constantly bring to God, and we need to be prepared for that enemy within as well. We can't act naive as if to say that we are not human and as a result susceptible to the forces of evil. And nobody knows our weakness more than us. So that was, in a nutshell, what we talked about the last time. And we're going to continue the start. We're going to look this morning at 14b. If you can put up verse 14. Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, we got that out the way, having put on the breastplate of righteousness. Now, I upgraded the breastplate of righteousness a bit. I call it the vest of righteousness, the bulletproof vest of righteousness. That's a picture of a bulletproof vest. That's what they use today, in these days. Even the guys in the military, the guys who are, in the desert and so on, they have their full uniform, and over it is a bulletproof vest. And you can see it's in camouflage just like the rest of them. Unlike the police who have the black ones, they have the camouflage, so it's fully integrated into their uniform. It covers the chest, the rib cage, and the back. And they have extended parts of these vests that cover parts of the shoulder and so on and so forth. But in essence, it covers the rib cage. And the rib cage, believe it or not, it's like a cage. It's a cage of ribs, as it were. And it houses vital, delicate organs. Of course, you know, one of the most vital organs is the heart. And it's just amazing to look at, for instance, the rib cage in itself and look at how God created us as human beings. God knew He had this pumping organ within us that's pumping blood all over the body. Very delicate organ. And so what does God do? He puts it in a cage in our body to protect it. So this heart, as it were, is the lifeline of the physical body, because it is pumping, literally pumping blood to the rest of the entire body. It's an amazing thing. And receiving blood, old blood, tired blood, as it were, gets cleaned up in that blood system, goes back through the heart, and it pumps it back out again to the rest of the body. Amazing, amazing thing. And they say that, science doesn't have God in it, right? So the heart is that lifeline of the body. Believe it or not, spiritually, the heart is also the lifeline of the body. What do I mean by that? When we talk about what drives a person, what you feel strongly about, what makes you move, what you love, we still refer to things of the heart, right? When we talk about I love you, it's an I and a heart, that's the emoji that we use, and the you. So it's the heart again. So the thing that we really commit to, the things that we are really dedicated to, we take them to heart. The things that really affect you, we say, you really hit me in my heart. That's like a vital feeling, the things that really makes you you. We still consider things of the heart. So as a Christian, the lifeline of your Christian faith, so to speak, is the heart. Your belief in God and your relationship with God, which is fundamental to who we are as Christians, should be a relationship of the heart. It's not an intellectual relationship. It should be deeper than that. It should be an emotional one. It should be one that you're sold out totally. You're really in love with Christ. That's what your relationship really should be. For many of us, it's strictly intellectual, it's strictly mental. And I'm saying it's got to be deeper than that. And of course, generated from that heart. So Paul is saying, protect that heart with the breastplate of righteousness. In Romans 10, 9 and 10, we read, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart, hear the heart again, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Just like I said, it's the basis of your relationship with God. Believing deep down in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. 10 says, for it is with the heart that you believe and are justified, and is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. So, like the physical heart, as I said, pumping life and blood through your body, this belief, this heart belief, pumps life into all other parts of who we are as a Christian. It is the driving force of who we are as Christians as a result. This belief from the heart, believe in God. So we need to protect that heart with this breastplate of righteousness. Now, righteousness is a big church word. And there are many sermons that have been preached on just righteousness alone. I'm just going to, as much as I can, give an explanation, a simple explanation of what righteousness is all about. Because even the verse that we read, the two verses that we read, verse 10 says, for it is with the heart that you believe and are justified. In the King James Version it says, it's the heart that you believe unto righteousness. So it's from this Greek word, dikaiosune. Yeah, I'm trying to learn a little Greek. One or two words. And this word, when you look at this word and look up all the meanings of this word, it's also related to justification. And that is why you see the version that I read, the New International Version, says, "For it is with the heart that you believe and are justified." So you might see them used interchangeably in places. Now, this word, as I said, righteousness, is a big word. It's used over 200 times in the Bible. And Paul uses it about 30 times in Romans alone. So as I said, we're just going to scratch the surface. Paul spends a lot of time talking about righteousness in many, many different places. A simple definition of righteousness, a broad definition, talks about the fact that it's almost like a doctrine concerning the way in which man may attain a state of approval of God. So, essentially, righteousness, according to this definition, is the means by which we get approval from God. But it's also seen as integrity, virtue, purity of life, rightness. Pastor always use the word rightness and interchange it with righteousness. This is why, because it is part of the definition. Correctness of thinking, feeling, and acting. Correctness of thinking, feeling, and acting. Not just acting, but feeling and thinking. So, righteousness has to do with a standard, as it were. A standard of being. Not just a standard of doing things. And you'll find out, you'll see later on why I'm spending so much time making that distinction. It's not just about a standard of doing things. It's a standard of being. It's a standard of feeling. It's a standard of who you are. It's a standard of living, as it were. Now, the Bible talks about righteousness, and it also talks about God's righteousness. So you can say God's standard. When you hear God's righteousness, just think God's standard. So God's righteousness or God's standard is the basis upon which Christ came and justified us. Justified is also a big church word that you hear all the time. Justification or justify means we are sinners. And let's back up a little bit. You're in a court, you're accused of a crime, you're found guilty of the crime. Somebody comes in and says, "I will take the sentence for you." That's justification. When somebody takes your sentence, not that you are innocent, but that you're guilty and they're taking the sentence for you. So, God's righteousness, God's standard, is the basis upon which God decided that Christ is going to step in and justify us. In other words, we are born in sin. We are a slave to sin. The Bible talks about being dead in sin. And Christ came to justify us, to pay the debt that we owe for sin through salvation on the cross. So, part of why God did what he did is his righteousness. It's who God is. It's a characteristic of who God is. Mercy and grace are part of his standard, his righteousness. And he looked at us and said, John 3:16, he so loved us that he gave his only son, so that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So that's the story of God's righteousness. And one of the reasons why I'm spending a lot of time about not just what you do, but who you are, is because Paul himself spent a whole lot of time talking about it in Romans. That's why he mentioned it 30 times. In Romans, he was basically talking about the law versus grace. He was talking about the righteousness of the law versus God's righteousness. And there are differences because, as you probably know by now, the righteousness of the law doesn't have too much grace in it. doesn't have too much mercy in it. In some places, 3 strikes and you're out, as it were, life sentence. So there's not much grace in the righteousness of the law. And in Romans, Paul recognized the fact that, there are people who, as far as they are concerned, as long as they follow the law and do the law, they think they are good. Everything is good. But Paul was quick to say, look, the righteousness of the law is not enough. It's not enough. And in fact, you can't even keep the law anyway. That's essentially a lot of what he said in Romans. So what Paul is saying is that we need the righteousness of God as a standard for ourselves, because he used that standard to set us free. And now that we are free, now that we are Christians, we should also use that righteousness that he's given us as our guide to form our own righteousness, to live by, as it were. So 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. All things are passed away. Behold, all things have become new. This is what justification is all about. The old things are passed away, wiped clean. All things become new. New slate, new standard to live by. So that's the whole essence of what this righteousness is all about. And this is the righteousness that's going to protect our belief in God, what drives us. It's going to protect it. That's what Paul is saying. We need to protect our belief, protect ourselves with this breastplate of righteousness. Now, when I was doing some studying and preparing, I found 2 different things. One thought, when you read 14b, it talks about, interprets the breastplate of righteousness to be the righteousness of God. I explained to you what the righteousness of God is. It's a standard, God's standard. And I said that God's standard is what he used to decide that he's going to justify us, free us from the ravages of sin, from the consequences of sin through Jesus Christ. Now, another thought says that when Paul talked about the breastplate of righteousness, that he was talking about our righteousness, our standard. Now, it might seem to be a contradiction, and at first I thought it was a contradiction. But then I found out that it's not really a contradiction at all. Why? It's because now that we are Christians, we are really supposed to, we receive, as I said before, God's righteousness. And there are many verses talking about the fact that now that we become Christians, we receive God's righteousness. We receive God's standard. But the fact of the matter is, we receive God's standard as information. But now our job as Christians is to apply God's righteousness to ourselves, to our lives, so that God's righteousness will be now our righteousness, our standard, the standard that we live by. So when Paul is talking about the righteousness, the breastplate of righteousness, he's saying that we need to be armed with righteousness, but the righteousness that's based on the righteousness of God. I hope you get that. So, when we put the vest on, we're protecting our heart, we're protecting our motivation, we're protecting our fundamental commitment to God. Now, this fundamental commitment to God is our desire to be upright, our desire to be right, our desire to live according to the standards of Jesus Christ. Our desire. It is not perfection. It is that we intend to, in our day-to-day living, be like Christ. Being righteous means to be right according to the standards of God. There's a quote here from Confucius. He says, if there is righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character. If there is beauty in the character, there will be harmony in the home. If there is harmony in the home, there will be order in the nations. When there is order in the nations, there will be peace in the world. The fact of the matter is then, if you are not desiring to live according to God's righteousness, then your vest is either weak or it's missing. And one of the things that you need to understand is that this whole armor of God functions most effectively when every single piece of it is there. If there's a piece that's missing, you're vulnerable to the wiles of the devil that Paul was talking about. And so if you don't desire to live according to God's righteousness, you will be missing a breastplate. You're going to be missing a bulletproof vest. And if you're missing your bulletproof vest, you're vulnerable, very vulnerable to the wiles of the devil. Remember, I talked about it's not just a state of doing things. Righteousness is not an activity. It's not just things that you do. It is a characteristic. It's a characteristic. It's a desire to live based on a set of characteristics. As I said, standard. It should become who you are. It should become who you are. That's one of the reasons why Paul says, if any man be, well, the verse that we read said, if any man be in Christ is a new creation. All things, the old characteristics passed away. You get a new chance to become new, create a new slate, and start over. So it should be who you are. It should become who you are. And Romans talk about presenting yourself to Christ as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, renewing who you are. So as I said, if you don't have that standard, if you don't have that standard covering your commitment, physically, quite physically, if you take, a hit, a blow to the heart or the cardiovascular system in any way, shape, or form, you're in trouble. You're going to cut off blood supply to the rest of your body. You're going to cut off the nutrients that all the different organs need to live. You might survive for a little while, but eventually you're going to bleed out, as they say. Same as a Christian. If you leave your commitment open, no breastplate, no standard of righteousness, no desire to live by the standards of God, you're going to leave yourself vulnerable, and eventually when you take a hit, you might survive for a while, but you're going to cut off the blood circulation to the rest of your Christian life. And you're going to eventually, your faith is going to bleed out. What do I mean by that? Your testimony will be rendered anemic. What is your testimony? You go and say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian. But you're not living according to the standards of God's righteousness. You're not living according to God's standards. You're not desiring to live according to His standards. You're going to get exposed. And so when you go out there and say, oh, I'm a Christian, somebody's going to say, yeah, right. Anemic testimony. Your worship is going to be weak. Again, your worship is a part of your Christian life. That's one aspect of your Christian life that is lacking blood now because you took a hit. You genuinely don't want to give up the desires of your heart. So your worship is going to be weak. You're not totally sold out. Your leadership is going to be weak if you're a leader in the church, because there'll be no substance. Again, no blood, so no energy, no evidence to demonstrate a desire after God's righteousness. So your spiritual life will become stagnant. And for many of us right now, our spiritual life seems stagnant. We need to check to see whether we have a desire to live according to God's standards or not. John 14:15 says, if you love me, remember we said love is a heart thing, right? So Jesus himself is saying, if you are committed to me from the heart, deep down, and not from the head, keep my commandments. It's as simple as that. If you say you love me, then it should drive what you do. It should drive who you are. It should drive the decisions that you make. Quite simply, you cannot desire to live like everyone else and say you're different. There are people out there that will look at you and realize that you have no breastplate on spiritually. Those people are your kids. Those people are your husbands, your wives, your co-workers, the people that see you outside of church. Because in church, we can play the part. We can play the part, and we play it very well in church. Once you leave church and you head to Publix, that's when we see whether you have it on your breastplate or not. And even Jesus himself, he encountered this. When a rich guy came to him and said, man, you're it, man. I want to follow you. What do I need to do? And Jesus said, all right, sell all you have and come follow me. And the Bible said he went away discouraged. Why? Because he did not have the desire to be sold out for Christ. He did not have the desire to live according to his standards. He was just interested in doing certain things, just doing certain things. And the fact of the matter is, there's a term that we use in software development, and it's called cherry picking. And what it means is that sometimes when we fix a problem, we decide to pick, we fix a number of problems. We decide to pick certain things in order to check them into the new software. iPhone comes out with new software, and they fix a lot of things. They have fixed a whole bunch of things, but certain things they decide to bring out in this version, and certain things they bring out in the next version. So what they do is that they cherry pick what they're going to fix and what they're not going to fix. Many of us in our Christian life, we are cherry picking the things that we want to do for God. We'll go to church. We'll read the Bible maybe Saturday night, prepare for Christian life next day. But no, I can't. Monday, can't do it, God. I can't do it. You know my heart, though. You know my heart. But I can't do it for Monday. This thing, I have to do this thing, God. I know it's not according to your standard, but I really need to do this thing. You know my heart. You know my heart, God. So we are cherry picking what we want to do for Christ. That's not the desire to live according to his righteousness. That's like righteousness of the law. That's doing stuff. That's not what God desires. He desires a change in attitude, a change in who we are, so that he wants us to desire to do what he wants us to do. Paul made a point of this in Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians, he talked a lot about, and he was talking to the church again, talked a lot about the fact that the Corinthian church had a problem with just wanting to do whatever made them feel good. They just wanted to do what was, the thing of the day. And so it had a lot of immorality. There was homosexuality. All the stuff that you think of that's going on today was going on in the Corinthian church. In the Corinthian church, I said. Not in the Corinthian society. In the Corinthian church. There are people who were cherry picking what they wanted to do for God. But they just couldn't give up the stuff that made them feel so good. Paul said, no, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. You have got to live according to the standard of God. You have to at least desire to live the standard of God. And I said desire because, look, Paul himself said, hey, I desire to live according to the standard of God. But Pastor talked about it the other day. But what I desire to do good, evil is present with me. So Paul was not unrealistic. He knows that sin is still there. The enemy within is still there. Paul knows that. But Paul said that he desires to do the right thing. Many of us, if you check yourself, you know that there are certain things that you will not give up. There are certain things that you will not give up. And so there's no controversy there. There's no desire to do anything other than that thing. Those things are a stumbling block. Those things are going to leave your chest vulnerable. Your spiritual heart is going to be vulnerable to attack through those things, that righteousness, that standard that you're using to live by. So that is what Paul is talking about. Are you driven towards righteousness by your commitment to God? Do you even have a heart commitment? Or is it an academic one, an intellectual one? Yeah, I know I need to believe in you because there must be a God who made everything here. So I believe in you based on that, based on intellect. The evolution only goes so far. We talked about it Thursday night in Bible study. By the way, friends, commercial. We're missing something good in Bible study. Thursday night, 8:15. We talked about the fact that, people, it's an intellectual thing. And that science and evolution sometimes, it seems to want to justify our counter creation. But at the end of the day, if you really think about it, if evolution goes so far, science goes so far, and scientists will tell you, any scientist worth their salt will tell you, it goes so far and no further. And so, once you get to that point, if you're an intellectual, you realize there must be a higher being, there must be a higher source. And so many of our Christian lives are based just on the intellect, just on logic. It's not enough. It's not enough. Faith is important. And faith in it by itself is not really logical. It has to be a heart commitment. You have to be sold out to the standards of righteousness. And many of us are just not totally sold out. We are living a Christian life where we're cherry picking things for God. One of the major questions today, in today's politics, surrounds this. And many of you have heard it because, I'm a news junkie, and I know many of you, even though you're not a news junkie, it's in your face now anyway, so you can't avoid it. One of the things that they're talking about these days is, do you do what is politically expedient, or do you risk your political career to do what is constitutionally and morally right? That's a question, as it were, of do you live according to standard, or you just do things, you just cherry pick and do certain things because you really need to do this or you really like this. You can't get rid of this. It's been a part of you. It feels so good. It makes you feel good. But it's not right. It's not going to be right. And so it's a decision spiritually that we need to look at, because it's going to leave our Christian life, our commitment, vulnerable. Are we willing to desire the things of God, to live according to His standards, or are we willing to just cherry pick, just do little things every now and then to show the world that we are committed to God, and yet we leave our commitment vulnerable to the attacks of the devil? So that's the first point. That's the breastplate of righteousness. The breastplate of righteousness is the breastplate of standards. Standards that should be based on God's standards that we should be living by. It should be the thing that drives our belief in God. The next thing we're going to look at, in verse 15, Paul says, also, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. So not only do you need the breastplate of righteousness to cover your chest area, you need your feet to be fitted, King James Version said shod, fitted with the preparation of the gospel of peace, fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Now, I upgraded again the Roman soldiers, footwear. And I have a picture of combat boots. This is what they wear today. Now, from a practical standpoint, the shoes are an integral part of defensive gear, believe it or not. in the Roman times, not only did they have sandals, I mean, most people were wearing sandals, but the sandals were protected by some kind of a metal plate. That's a part of the protective gear. Now, that combat boot that you see in there, of course, like I said, is what they use in modern times. And it's designed to protect the feet from all kinds of weather conditions, all kinds of different terrain. Like that one in particular is actually waterproof. And so it also is designed to add some comfort as well for long, periods of time. You're going to be in it for a long time. So it needs to protect the feet. And not necessarily to protect the feet from attack, but to protect the feet that you need to use to move, frankly. Because if your feet are all blistered up, it doesn't matter how much gear you have on and how big your gun is, you're not going to go very far if your feet have blisters on it. So your feet need to be protected. Now, I have had a big issue. And I don't know if you have had it, but as a parent, I'm having a big problem. You adults, you know what slides are? Those of you who know what slides are, just raise your hand. If you don't know what slides are, ask some of these kids that are sitting over here in this corner. And I'm going to explain to you anyway. Slides are like slippers. But they don't have that, that little thing in between the toes. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I'm sure you've seen it by now. But you see these guys and girls walking around with socks on, with these things. They call slides. They're not slippers. They're not slippers. They are slides. Okay? Learn that. Put that in your vocabulary, adults. They are slides. Now, I know them because I play soccer in high school. And when you have some money in high school, you have slides because after you play a game of soccer, you have soccer cleats with all the studs on it. So you can't just walk off the soccer field and walk around with these studs on. You slide most of the time, and not only that, you damage the shoes themselves. So if you have a little money, what you do is you buy a pair of slides. So once you play the game, you take off your cleats, and you just push your feet in the slides. And those slides fit the socks and everything, so it's very comfortable. And it's a temporary footwear. Now today, it is not temporary, it's a standard footwear for these kids. So much so that the school says it's legal to wear them to school. Yes, it's legal to wear them to school. So I have a big problem, and I'm quarreling with myself mostly. But quarreling about the fact that it's legal to wear them to school. And of course, I lay down the law in my house, and you're not leaving the house going to school with no slides on. I don't care where you're going. No slides. I don't even like them leaving the house with slides on to go anywhere, because I believe that your feet should be prepared for change in conditions. I mean, if you have to pick up and run, as we used to say back in the day, the slide is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. So you need to be prepared when you're moving around. And so slides are not going to, they're fashionable, but they're not practical. Now, interestingly enough, as we're talking about footwear, I went to a wedding the other day, and of course the ladies were looking fabulous in their gowns and their heels, and they're looking good. As soon as the ceremony was finished and they went to the reception, I kid you not, about 5 women went into a bag and pulled out a pair of slippers, and they kicked off their heels and put on their slippers for the reception. I did not know that was a thing, but it is a thing apparently. Women are not playing around anymore. Once they have shown you the heels, now it's time to put on something practical. They're taking off the heels and they put on slippers. And the slippers are fashionable, by the way. They do match the dress. So the fact is, your shoes make a difference. Your shoes make a difference. Now, just for comic relief, I'm going to show you a commercial from the 1990s. I'm going to ask him to play this commercial.
Mars Blackman here with my main man, Michael Jordan. Yo, Mike, what makes you the best player in the universe? Is it the vicious stumps?
No, Mars.
Is it the haircut?
No, Mars.
Is it the shoes?
No, Mars.
Is it the extra long shorts?
No Mars.
It's the shoes then, right?
Nah,
Is it the short socks?
no Mars.
Money's gotta be the shoes. Shoes. You sure it's not the shoes?
I'm sure Mars.
What about the shoes?
No Mars.
Money's gotta be the shoes.
All right. So that commercial is saying, basically, what makes Michael Jordan has got to be the shoes. Got to be the shoes. Now, believe it or not, most of us believed it because most of us bought a whole bunch of Michael Jordan shoes. Many of us believe that if we wore Michael Jordan's shoes, we could dunk like he dunked and play like he played. I'm not saying that the shoes are going to make you superhuman, but you need appropriate shoes for the appropriate event, for the appropriate situation. The shoes are absolutely important. What you wear on your feet will make a difference on what your next move is. Paul is saying that we need to be prepared, our feet need to be prepared with the good news. The gospel is another phrase, another meaning for the gospel is the good news. The good news of peace. So we need to be prepared. Our feet need to be prepared with the gospel of peace in a world of constant stress and constant opposition. Ironically, Paul is saying that in this fight that we are in, we need to be prepared with the gospel of peace. How are you going to bring peace to a fight? As we move through our fight, our movement should be held up, should be buoyed, because the feet hold you up in the fight, right? So we should be held up by the gospel of peace, especially in the midst of conflict. How does that make sense? This is a war we're in. It's a war we're in. How can we be walking through this war with the preparation of peace? John 16:33 says that these things I have spoken to you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. In that chapter, Christ just got done telling the disciples all kinds of stuff's going to happen to them. He got done telling them that he's going to be leaving, and not in necessarily a pleasant way. And then he says, at the end of it all, relax. Take it easy. Don't worry yourself. I have overcome the world. Further on, in Philippians 4, verse 7, we read, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard our hearts and our mind in Christ Jesus. Now, just a while ago I said, how does it make sense? The verse here proves it. The verse says, which surpasses all understanding. So, in fact, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to the human, but it makes sense to the Christian. You see, because the peace of God that this verse is talking about, the peace that Paul is talking about that we need to shod ourselves with, the peace that we need to put on our feet, is the peace of God. And this peace of God is not generated from human conditions. It's not generated by or from human conditions, and it's not demotivated or affected by human conditions and circumstances. It's just not. It is the peace of God. It's generated from God. And so Paul is essentially saying that yes, we need to have this peace, especially in times of conflict, because it's not motivated by these times of conflict, and so it will be able to help you to deal with the conflicts. It's going to help you move the right way. It's going to make you make the right decisions during the situations of conflict. You will take a more positive view on things if you are shod with the preparation of peace. You won't get weary. You know, if you have on the wrong pair of shoes, your feet get tired. You just feel tired because it's just not supporting you well enough. The gospel of peace is going to support you in such a way that you won't get weary when things get stressed around you. You're not going to get tired. You're going to have a little bit more perseverance. You're going to choose your responses differently, wisely. You're going to avoid certain conflicts. You're going to look for the good in people instead of the bad. You're going to look to build them up instead of tearing them down. You're going to realize He's human. He's, literally human, and part of being human is vulnerable to sin. You're not going to sweat the small stuff in your marriage. You're just going to brush certain things off. When you are prepared with that peace, that peace of God, it doesn't make sense, but because it's not generated by what the person says to you, or how many bad words you say, or how big they are, you're going to be able to go through soberly, with a calm demeanor, as it were, and get through the fight that you're in. So, even though these shoes are not a weapon, and they don't have a shield necessarily, they are important. They are part of this whole armor. They're going to help you to be sober in dealing with the powers that you have to fight with. And the analogy is that they're your feet, which support you. So this is going to be a support for your Christian life. It's a necessary support. Many of us are losing our religion, as it were, because our tongue are not under subjection. And our temper is not under subjection. And so, there's no peace. There's no peace of God within us. And so we respond to any little external stimuli, and we fly off the handle. We need this gospel of peace to support us as we fight the power that we have to fight. So the time is gone. So clearly, I'm not finished with the section. But we're going to stop there until next time. I'm going to close. And this is how we're going to close. As I said to you before, we need the whole armor. And many times when we talk about this section, we talk about it from a standpoint of the collective, the ecclesia. Paul is talking to the Ephesian church. And he's saying, as a church, we need to gear up with the whole armor of God. One of the things I really believe God is trying to tell us today, that this message is not for the collective church. This message is for the individual Christian. This message is for the individual Christian because we are required to defend our faith. And many times when we hear defend the faith, we think, oh, you need to defend the Christian faith. Now, I know that there are apologists out there. There are guys who their job is to defend the faith against people who want to debunk the faith. But to be honest with you, it's over 2,000 years old now. The gospel of Jesus Christ does not need you to defend it. It does not need you to defend it anymore. Because it's already established. It's established in history. It's established in science. It's established spiritually. Religiously, it's established. As much as they have apologists out there that are defending the faith, it does not need you to defend it anymore for it to be real. It's already real. All you have is people out there that refuse to believe what is real. But your job is to defend your faith, your Christian life. You have to defend your Christian life against your wife, your husband, your children, your co-workers who don't know Christ. And so if they are looking on you and seeing you missing a breastplate, or if they're looking on you and seeing that you don't have the shoes of peace, then there is question not in the faith, but there is question in your faith. And if you don't have this Christian faith, the Bible says it's impossible to please God. So this is a message of self-evaluation. I'm going to ask the praise team to come at this time. And while we sing, just look at yourself. Are you desiring to live according to the standards of God? Or are you just picking different things that you want to do for God every now and then? It's not enough to do that, because when you do that, you leave yourself vulnerable for the powers that we're fighting. And you're going to fall victim eventually, and your faith is going to be called into question. Not only by man, but it's going to be called into question by God, frankly, because God sees anyway. I mean, you can dress up for us as humans, but God knows your heart. So we need to check on that. We need to check to see if we have peace as our support system, as we face our conflicts. Some of us, we might be falling victim to conflicts because we don't have the preparation of peace as part of who we are. And so we're going to sing. And while we're singing, pray for yourself. Verse 18, Paul says, praying always with prayer and supplication. That's part of the defense system too. Prayer. And we'll talk about that some other time. And he also says, not only pray for yourself, but Paul says, pray for me. So you see me standing here looking at you, pray for me too, because I'm not any different. I have those issues that I have to evaluate as well. So we're going to sing.